All right, we just had a couple of loose ends to tie up in Judges chapter 8 with Gideon and his tenure over Israel. And so if you would be turning in your Bibles there, I hope to get through him and Abimelech this morning. All right. In Judges chapter 8, we have Gideon pursuing the last of the Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And in the process of doing so, he comes to the cities of Succoth and Penuel. And those cities would have been located east of the Jordan River. And I commented last time on how this is really showing how the nation of Israel has kind of become fractured by the Jordan in some ways. But neither Succoth nor Penuel is really willing to help Gideon at this particular time. They are refusing his help. And so Gideon says, fine, when I get the job done without you, I'm going to come back and I'm going to tear down your tower. I'm going to beat the elders of this city and all that. In verse 10 through 12, he captures Zebah and Zalmunna. In verse 13, Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres and captured a youth from Succoth and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. He came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your men who are weary? He took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. He tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of that city. All right, so we see that after all of this, Gideon comes back. He captures one of the youths of the city. The youth gives Gideon a list of the 77 elders, and their army is, they take their army and Gideon basically throws their words back in their faces. He has the elders beaten with thorns and briars. The men who usually had the job of disciplining men of the city are themselves disciplined by Gideon. Gideon also tears down the tower of Penuel, like he said, and then Gideon does something that he didn't say he would do. What does he do? He killed the men of the city, which maybe that maybe seem a little bit like overkill to you. I get the impression that Gideon goes a little too far here, going beyond what he has said. It's one thing to discipline people for not helping. It's another thing altogether to treat their cities like they were one of the Canaanite cities. Again, though, their narrator's not giving us a commentary. The narrator's only telling us what happened. He's not giving an evaluation. So we're kind of left to fill in the blanks for ourselves a little bit. One thing I think that's clearly going on here is we're seeing how Israel is becoming progressively Canaanized. They're becoming like the nations around them. When an Israelite city is treated the way Canaanite cities would be treated, well, maybe it shows that Israelite cities are becoming a bit too much like those Canaanite cities. Gideon has to turn from fighting the Midianites to turn and fight his own people. Instead of hacking Midian and contending with Baal, Gideon has begun hacking and contending with the Israelite people. And the Israelite cities refuse to help Gideon, shows that they're not much better for it. They're not very, the nation is clearly fractured and there's a lot of things going wrong. And then in verses 18 through 21, we see another side of this as well. That he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor? And he said, They were like you, each one resembling the son of a king. He said, They were my brothers and sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if only you would let them live, I would not kill you. So he said to Jether, his firstborn, Rise and kill them. But the youth did not draw the sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise up yourself and fall on us, for as the man, so is his strength. So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna and took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. Now in this scene here, Zebah and Zalmunna admit to killing Gideon's kinsmen at Tabor. This is the first time we've heard about anything happening at Tabor or anything about Gideon's kinsmen being killed. And so the narrator is introducing this piece of information into the story. In fact, this is the first time at all that we learn that the Midianites have really been killing anybody. Prior to this, in chapter 6, it was just said that they were stealing crops from the Israelites. They would come and they would devour everything like locusts. But in this passage, we learn that they have been killing, and they have been killing some of the Israelites, some of Gideon's relatives. And Gideon says in verse 19, If you hadn't done that, I'd spare you. Now, that's odd considering that he just got finished killing the men of Penuel for refusing to help him. But the other side of this is we don't really know if Gideon's telling the truth here either. That's another problem that we need to think about. Gideon's firstborn son is unwilling to avenge his fallen relative. This is one of the few instances in the Bible where somebody is afraid to kill somebody else just simply out of fear or nervousness. And so Gideon kills them instead. And he takes their camels' crescent ornaments. Zeba and Zalmunna taunt him a little bit. They say, as the man, so is his strength, which is kind of an ancient idiomatic way of saying, prove yourself a man, do this to us. And so Gideon kills them off and takes their crescent ornaments. The crescent ornaments would probably have been related, signifiers of the fact that they were kings, related to the fact that they were, the rulers of the Midianite people. And why would Gideon take the crescent ornaments? Because he liked them. Yeah, that's a good point. There's of course a symbolic taking away of the kingship from them. And of course it prompts the very next question that the nation of Israel asks Gideon, does it not? In verse 22, the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Yet Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil. For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian. And beside the neckbands that were on their camels' necks, Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Now, there's really kind of a question that needs to be asked here, okay? Does Gideon reject the idea of him being king? Right. Now that sounds like a good thing to say, doesn't it? Sounds like the right thing to say as long as you back it up. That's a good qualifier. Does Gideon back it up? Yeah. I mean, now on the surface, what Gideon says looks pious. I will not be your king, God will be your king. You have that kind of same conversation going on in 1 Samuel chapter 8, whenever Israel demands a king again from Samuel. And if these verses are read in isolation, it looks pretty good. Gideon looks pretty good. But the problem is that we got to see the bigger picture, and the bigger context. Israel wants Gideon to be king, and Gideon refuses, but what does he do? He collects a gold tribute from the Israelites. That sounds like pretty kingly behavior. Sounds like the kind of thing a king would do. And 1,700 shekels, I did some looking it up, and I don't know how good my numbers are, but at today's gold cost, this is close to $1 million tribute from the people. They've given him all this gold. And though Gideon is called in the manner of Moses, well, what does this scene remind us of? Each one of you, give me a gold earring, and I'm going to make something out of it. What does that sound like? It sounds like Aaron and the golden calf, doesn't it? And we're supposed to see the connection. Though Gideon is called in the manner of Moses and delivers Israel from their oppressors, he ends the story like Aaron, building a golden image for an ungrateful nation. He sets up this idol. It's called an ephod. What was it? Anyway, what was an ephod? Yeah, the ephod was, in the law, the ephod was the garment worn by the priests. Now, it's just a word for a garment. But it could refer to a garment worn by a priest, or less commonly, a garment worn by a god. And in this text, it's almost certainly an idiom for not just the garment, but for the god that's wearing the garment. He makes this ephod in the city, and the people are ensnared by it. They play the harlot after it. Basically, they worship it. So what he builds here is an idol. And Gideon started the story clothed in the Spirit of Yahweh. In verse 34 of chapter 6, he ends the story by creating clothing for an idol. When Gideon starts his story by tearing down the altar of Baal at Ophrah, he ends his story by setting up an idol at Ophrah for the people to be ensnared by once again. So Gideon comes full circle in this story. And in verse 28, it says that Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel. They did not lift up their heads anymore. The land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Gideon, rules over Israel at 40 years. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now, Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and she named him Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a ripe old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. All right. Gideon has a lot of kids. How does he get so many kids? Yeah, you don't get 70 sons without having multiple wives. And the text says he has many wives. Except that in the ancient world, was having a bunch of wives something that everybody did? Not really. Only very select individuals would do something like that. And who were they usually? They were usually kings. Now, the Bible says something about kings having wives. What does it say? What does the law say? Was it okay for kings to have lots of wives? Did God just kind of go, yeah, kings can have as many wives as they want? Is that what he said? Yeah. So Solomon, it's clear he was led astray by that. The law of Moses says in Deuteronomy 17 in verse 16, talking about the king, moreover, he shall not multiply wives for himself. Well, he shall not multiply horses for himself, since he shall cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to them, you shall never again return that way. Verse 17, he shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. You got Gideon doing two of those things right here. Here, give me all your gold. And here, I'm going to take a bunch of wives. He is living not just like a king, but like the king that Deuteronomy forbids the people from having. And then, to top the icing on the cake, he has a son named Abimelech. What is Abimelech? Anybody know what the name Abimelech means? Yeah, it means my father is king. Father, Avi, my father, Melech, king. So, Gideon claims, I will not be king over you, but not only does Gideon have a son that he names my father is king, he has a number of wives like a king would. He collects a large gold tribute like a king would. And in the very next story, we find out that everybody assumes that Gideon's sons are going to be kings too. That's a real problem. No, this is warned against. Well, in chapter 7, there was a warning against, letting Israel forget God, giving them the victory, and taking credit for that victory. There was a warning against being too full of themselves. And it appears that Gideon got a little too full of himself at the end of his life. There's a danger in that, the Bible, frequently has warnings about this. People who were heroes of faith, did the right thing, and then just got off track in their old age for whatever reason. Be very careful that we don't become mellowed out, that we don't become full of ourselves, or that we don't become, we just don't start putting things ahead of God just because we're in a later stage of life. We must stay faithful to the Lord always. Verse 33, it came about as soon as Gideon was dead that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, or would deliver them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. And what starts from here now is the story of Abimelech himself, who was introduced in verse 31. Abimelech is in many ways one of the low points in this part of Judges. With Gideon dead, Israel's come full circle. They've forsaken the Lord as soon as he's off the scene. And it may even look like, with the death of Jerubbaal, Baal has finally successfully contended for himself. He finally got his way. Now he's back in Israel again, and they've made a covenant with Baal all over again. And in fact, throughout chapter 9, Yahweh is never called by his covenant name. It's always God or Elohim or something like that. The exception to this is Jotham, whose name means Yahweh is perfect. And he basically speaks for God in this story. But Gideon is only referred to as Jerubbaal throughout. God intervenes in Abimelech's time too. But he doesn't intervene in Abimelech's time to save people. He intervenes to destroy. Israel again plays the harlot with the Baals. You hear that statement, the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals. You think, okay, that cycle of the judges is going to start over again, right? But not completely. We're kind of deconstructing it a little bit. No foreign oppressor is mentioned. Instead, the oppressor comes from right within their ranks. No, there's no cry to God for help. There's no God raising up a deliverer to save the nation. Instead, what happens is Gideon's wicked son Abimelech makes himself king, winds up doing more harm than good. He is both oppressor and judge, and ultimately destroys himself in his evil behavior. Even though God has saved them faithfully, they did not remember God. And in verse 35, they did not show kindness to the house of Gideon either. They are ungrateful both to their divine deliverer and their human deliverer. How they treat God is mirrored in how they treat Gideon's family. We get an elaboration on that at the beginning of chapter 9. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and spoke to them and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, "Speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. Which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rule over you? Also, remember that I am your bone and your flesh." His mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, and they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, "He's our relative." They gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows. And then they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the son of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. All the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar which was in Shechem. All right. My father is king, becomes king. Really odd name for a father to give his son if he didn't want to be king. And throughout this whole speech, he's assuming that all of Gideon's sons are going to rule over you. Which, again, seems to imply that Gideon was ruling over them. How does Abimelech convince these people to go along with this? Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a family loyalty rivalry thing going on here. Okay, you got Abimelech, and he's got his father, Gideon. Now, what tribe was Gideon from? Anybody remember? Nobody remembers. Huh? No, he was not from Ephraim. He was from Manasseh. He was from Manasseh here. So, all right. Now, over here we have Abimelech's mother. Where's she from? Right here in the text. We just read it. Yeah, Shechem. All right. So. All right, now Shechem was one of the major cities in the tribe of Ephraim, right? So, in the strictest sense, these two aren't even from the same tribe. Now, what Abimelech does is he says, okay, all of Gideon's sons are going to rule Israel. He says, but you guys in Shechem, how would you like to have a claim on this? How would you like to be the base of power? Because the only claim that Shechem has is their relationship with Abimelech. That's the only connection they've got with Gideon. So he convinces them to, X out everybody else on Gideon's side of it so that he can be king and they can be the base of power exclusively. This is what he's doing politically, is he's saying, I'm your bone and your flesh. I can make you great. I can do this wonderful thing for you. He makes a big promise. He's brilliant politician, I guess, in this way. He makes a campaign promise. And who funds him? Who pays for this whole thing? Huh? They do. The Shechemites do. How do they pay for it? Where do they take the money? Baal-berith. Yeah, Baal-berith. It's paid for by the Baal cult. That's what happens. Abimelech's entire campaign is funded by Baal. And, they give him 70 pieces of silver to kill 70 brothers. That was the price for hitmen in those days, apparently. And, they go and they recruit these army of empty and reckless fellows. And Abimelech goes out and he kills his brothers on one stone. He eliminates all of the rivals that he has for the throne of Israel. Now, the fact that he even has rivals and that they're all descendants of Gideon implies that the nation thought Gideon would be king. Abimelech has only been on the scene really for 5 verses, and he already joins the ranks of Cain and Absalom and Jehoram, guys that kill their brothers. 1 John 3 in verses 11 and 12 talks about how Cain was of the evil one because he slew his brother. He is the seed of the devil. He is the seed of that serpent described in Genesis 3. And I think there's some decisive irony in the fact that his head gets crushed at the end of the story. But there's something to that. Abimelech is not a good character. Shechem crowns him king. With no other rivals left, he now rules the nation. Shechem's a good city to rule from. It's located centrally in Israel, right between Mount Ebal and Gerizim, where they were supposed to have that covenant ceremony, renewal every 7 years. And because they're within... Yes, James?
So,
well, Saul's not the first king. Abimelech's the first attempt at a king. It kind of ends in disaster. I get the impression that Abimelech's rule was not universally recognized by the nation. He seems to be... There's all sorts of these localized comments. And the only place that really is discussed in this text is Shechem. And he's not really able to get the rest of the nation to help him out, it looks like. So Abimelech is definitely the first attempt at a king. There's some parallels between Abimelech and Saul, though, we'll look at. He has some very similar... Probably the biggest thing Abimelech has in common with Saul is the way he dies. It's very, very similar there. All right. Now verses 7 through 21, Jotham escapes, and we find out what happens to him here. When they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim, so it would have been within sight of Shechem, and he lifted his voice and called out, and thus he said to them, "Listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may listen to you." But once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Shall I leave my fatness with which God and men are honored and go to wave over the trees?" Then the tree said to the fig tree, "You, come reign over us." But the fig tree said to them, "Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit and go to wave over the trees?" Then the tree said to the vine, "You, come reign over us." But the vine said to them, "Shall I leave my new wine and which cheers God and men and go to wave over the trees?" Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, "You, come reign over us." The bramble said to the trees, "If in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Now therefore, if you have dealt in truth and integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have dealt with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian. But you have risen against my father's house today and have killed his son, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your relative. If then you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and consume Abimelech." Then Jotham escaped and fled and went to Beer and remained there because of Abimelech, his brother. This is one of those few examples in the Old Testament. This is one of the few examples of an Old Testament parable or a fable or whatever you want to call it. Jotham goes up onto the mountain of blessing, Mount Gerizim, and he proclaims a curse. And he tells this story about how the trees want to make a king. And they're all interviewing different trees for the position. And they go to the most prized trees first. The olive tree. The olive tree says, "I'm too busy making olives to do that." Oh, the fig tree, "I'm too busy making figs to do that." The vine, "I'm too busy making grapes and new wine to do that." These people, it's like, why would I leave these things that I am giving to men to go rule over you? Finally, Finally, they go to the bramble. Do you think a bramble would be a good tree to consult and take shade in and refuge in? You want to take refuge? You want to go hide under a thorn bush? Is that a good place to get shade from the heat? No! It's a terrible idea. But the bramble's their only choice left. So they go with the bramble. Well, the bramble's, going to be a good king to us. And what does the bramble say? Well, he has nothing to contribute, but he says, well, okay, we'll take refuge in my shade. But if you're not willing to do that, he says he proclaims a curse on the trees that fire will come out and destroy him. Now, strictly speaking, that's not identical to what happened so far. The trees are actively seeking out a king. Abimelech was the one that wanted to be king. The one that made his campaign for himself. And Abimelech was the only candidate. The trees are kind of going from guy to guy and they're all turning it down. So in a sense, the situation that Jotham describes is actually better than the one that the Shechemites are currently underway with. But who's the bramble in this story? Abimelech. It's pretty clear, yeah. The worst place to seek shade in. But all the other options have been exhausted because everybody else is dead. And so Jotham cites all the good that Gideon has done, all the evil the Shechemites have done to his household. The Shechemites didn't make Abimelech king because they liked Gideon. They made him king because he's their relative. And so this is the big if. He says, if you've really been dealing with the house of Jerubbaal in faithfulness by making him king, well then, rejoice in your new king. Take refuge in the shade of your wonderful thorn branch. But if not, let fire come forth. Let destroy each other. He proclaims a curse on them, basically. And so what happens in reality is that Shechem and Abimelech are going to destroy themselves. They both deserve each other. The wicked king will be destroyed by the people he rules, and the wicked people will be destroyed by the king that rules them. You've made your bed, now lie in it. Any comments or questions up to verse 21? Or 22? 21. All right, well, it doesn't take very long for Jotham's curse to be fulfilled. Did you have something?
Gideon, first.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of that, but that's possible, yeah. I hadn't thought about the connection with his firstborn, but that's something to think about, yeah. All right, so we learn about Gideon's rule. Verse 22, Abimelech. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. Now, whether or not all Israel recognized his rule is probably questionable, but this is their first recorded attempt at a king. Then, verse 23, God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. The men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech so that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. The men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who might pass by them along the road. And it was told to Abimelech. So all of a sudden the Shechemites get disillusioned with their leader. They don't like him very much anymore. It's only been 3 years. That's less than the terms of a single president in our country, I might note in passing. But they get disillusioned pretty quick, and they start setting men in ambush against him. But who's the cause of all these events that are about to take place? Who's going to destroy these people really? Verse 23, God sent an evil spirit. There's a lot of points in Judges where God puts the Spirit of the Lord upon somebody. The Spirit of the Lord came on Othniel. The Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon or on Jephthah or on Samson. Here God sends His Spirit, but not a good spirit, a bad spirit, an evil spirit. The same thing happens to Saul later. Saul has the Spirit of the Lord, but when David is anointed, the Spirit of the Lord departs from Saul and an evil spirit comes and torments him in 1 Samuel 16. It's kind of like a demon, and it causes him to destroy himself. And the evil spirit causes the men of Shechem to deal treacherously with Abimelech in order to avenge the blood of Gideon's sons. Just as Abel's blood cried out from the ground for vengeance, the sons of Gideon's and their blood similarly cries out, and God will be the one to avenge. Well, a part of this another guy shows up on the scene at Shechem. Gaal, the son of Ebed, in verse 26, came over with his relatives and crossed over into Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their trust in him. They went out into the field and gathered the grapes of their vineyards and trod them and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God, and they ate and they drank and they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal the son of Ebed said, "Who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal? And is not Zebul his lieutenant? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. Why should we serve him? Would therefore that this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech." And then he said to Abimelech, "Increase your army and come out." So, what do we see here? How's Gaal motivating these people? Let's take care of Abimelech. But why would you want to get rid of Abimelech and replace him with me? It's going to be better. Why? What's the argument he makes? Who's Abimelech? He's just the son of this guy. He's not a real Shechemite. He's this tribe of Gideon. He says, you should pick someone like me. You know, an actual son of Shechem. An actual son of Hamor, the father of Shechem. You know, so once again, we see how Gaal is appealing to the Shechemites' nepotism in order to get them to do what he wants. You know, this is the same argument Abimelech used. Gaal just uses it to sway them in the other direction. Suddenly that flesh and blood thing doesn't look so good anymore, does it? You know. And so the Shechemites are going, yeah, you know what? You're right. And maybe Abimelech hadn't done the stuff he should have. It doesn't seem like he's in Shechem when this is going on, which means they may not have been his power base after all. He just used them to get his way. But for whatever reason, the Shechemites are disillusioned with him. They join forces with Gaal, a native Shechemite, and now they set out to overthrow Abimelech. And when Zebul, the ruler of the city, apparently Zebul is a governor that Abimelech left in charge of Shechem. When he heard the words of Gaal the son of Ebed, his anger burned. He sent messengers to Abimelech deceitfully, saying, "Behold, Gaal the son of Ebed and his relatives have come to Shechem, and behold, they're stirring up the city against you. Now therefore, arise by night, you and the people who are with you, lie in wait in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And behold, when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you shall do to them whatever you can." So then, in this instance, Abimelech learns of Gaal's treachery. The lieutenant who's in the city informs Abimelech, he says, they had a big party and they all cursed you and now they're planning to overthrow you. We got to do something about this. It's really interesting to note that Abimelech is not in Shechem when this is happening. But Zebul proposes an ambush. Lie in wait outside the city and we'll catch these people. So, verse 34, all Abimelech and all the people who were with him arose by night, lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal the son of Ebed went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate, and Abimelech and the people who were with them arose from the ambush. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." But Zebul said to him, "You're seeing the shadows of mountains as if they were men." Gaal spoke again and said, "Behold, people are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company comes by the way of the diviner's oak." Then Zebul said to him, "Where is your boasting now with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?' Is this not the people whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them." So Gaal went out before the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech remained at Arumah, but Zebul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not remain in Shechem. So Abimelech takes his army against the city. Gaal is watching from the gate. I get the impression that Zebul is within the city with him when all this is going on. And Zebul kind of tries to trick him. "Oh, no, there's no army coming. You're just seeing shadows," until he gets too close to prepare and do anything about it. Then he taunts him and says, "Where's your boasting now? Go out and fight him." So Gaal goes out and fights him and loses. And he has to flee from Shechem. And so it looks like Abimelech has won, doesn't it? It looks like, he puts down this revolt. He puts a stop to it. But the story's not over yet. In verse 42, it came about that the next day that the people went out to the field, and it was told to Abimelech. So he took his people and divided them into 3 companies, lay in wait in the field. When he looked and saw the people coming out from the city, he arose against them and slew them. Then Abimelech and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood at the entrance of the city gate. The other 2 companies then dashed all who were in the field and slew them. Abimelech fought against the city that day and captured the city and killed the people who were in it. He razed the city and sowed it with salt. Destroys the whole city, kills everybody in the city. Why would he sow it with salt? What's the point of that? It ruins the soil. Okay, yeah. You frequently see people do that whenever they conquer enemy fields. They burn the field and they sow it with salt. But this is a city, an urban area. Why would you sow that with salt? You know, are they going to be growing a lot of crops in there? I mean, huh? It's kind of a way of condemning the city. I mean, and so while you sow seed, when fields are sown with salt to render them infertile, here the city is sown with salt, kind of as a symbolic way of saying, may the city never rise again. When Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, Deuteronomy 29 indicates that they are currently a burning waste of salt. It was God's way of condemning them and saying they will never be rebuilt. There's several other passages in the Bible that use salt as a symbol for the permanence of destruction. But we're not done. Oh no, because it turns out that Abimelech's only taken the lower part of the city. The temple of El-Berith, or Baal-Berith, it's the same temple actually. The leaders of Shechem have fled to the inner sanctuary of that tower. And in verse 46, when all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard it, they entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. It was told Abimelech that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees and lifted it and laid it on his shoulder. And then he said to the people who were with him, what you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise. All the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech and put them on the inner chamber and set the inner chamber on fire over those out inside. So that all the men of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. The inhabitants of Shechem, when Jotham cursed them and said, let fire come from Abimelech and destroy you, now we see that very thing has happened, does it not? Fire has come out from Abimelech and consumed the inhabitants of Shechem. He destroys the tower. He takes the lower part of the city, he puts down the revolt, and then he completely destroys Shechem with fire. Their place of revelry where they ate and drank and cursed Abimelech has now become their tomb. Alright, so half of Jotham's curse is fulfilled. The Shechemites have been destroyed by Abimelech, but the story's not over yet either. In verse 50, Abimelech went to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. Now, I don't know exactly why he went to Thebez. It seems like that would have been a near satellite town to Shechem. And the attack really kind of seems unnecessary almost. Abimelech has won. We already know that he's finished this fight, but Abimelech's lust for blood becomes his undoing. In verse 51, there was a strong tower in the center of the city, and all the men and the women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shook themselves in, and they went up on the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. Tries the same trick twice. But a certain woman there threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. He called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, so that it will not be said of me, a woman slew him. So the young man pierced him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each departed to his home. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father, in killing his 70 brothers. Also God returned all the wickedness of the men of Shechem on their heads. And the curse of Jotham the son of Jerubbaal came upon them. Several points can be made here. First of all, crushing his skull, just as Yael, a woman, crushed the skull of Sisera, now another woman crushes the skull of Abimelech. Abimelech is just like the Canaanites, is he not? Just another Canaanite bad guy, even though he's technically descended from Israel. Second, we might note that this comment here, Abimelech survives long enough to get his armor-bearer to say to his armor-bearer, kill me, so that they won't say I was killed by a woman. Now, does that work? No, that doesn't work. In fact, it's exactly what's said later. 2 Samuel 11 in verse 21 has always kind of struck me as amusing. Joab is talking about battle strategies and what to say to King David in a certain comment. And just in passing, Joab makes a reference to the story of Abimelech. And he says, who struck down Abimelech the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at Thebez? Why would you go near the wall? 2 Samuel 11:21. So Abimelech doesn't want them to say, I was killed by a woman, but they say it later. So it doesn't work. But the other thing, this reminds us of what happened with Saul. Saul gets mortally wounded in battle in 1 Samuel 31, and he tells his armor bearer, kill me so they won't say I was killed by the uncircumcised Philistines, and they won't make sport of me and whatnot. And the armor bearer kills him. That's the same thing that's going on here. Saul is, in many ways, just another Abimelech in the way he dies, and we're going to see that more when we get to Samuel. And finally, I would note, and I've already alluded to this before, that Abimelech as a brother killer puts him in the category of the seed of Satan, the seed of the devil, kind of like Cain. But there was a promise made in Genesis chapter 3 that there would be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of woman all the days of their life, and that he would crush your head while you would merely bruise his heel. There is a sense in which that is partially fulfilled in Abimelech. It's not completely perfect parallel, but it is interesting to me that God promised that the seed of woman would crush the head of the serpent. And here we see a woman crushing the head of one of these seed of the serpent here in Judges chapter 9. So there's another interesting point that can be made. What is done by killing Abimelech foreshadows the ultimate defeat of the devil himself in Christ. So that brings us to the end of the story of Abimelech. Any comments or questions? Perfect timing. All right, next time we will pick up with Tola and Jer, and then we'll look more at Jephthah and what a great guy he was.